Cyber. So, tonight or today or whenever, wherever you are, I'm going to try talking about a memoir this time tonight, which is admittedly a little different for me. Most of the time, I tend to lean towards reading fiction, and I tend to talk about fiction more. And I'm used to talking about fictional characters, and I kind of went back and forth on whether I wanted to make this video, because I don't want to impose the same, I obviously don't want to impose the same sort of ideas that I would have toward a fictional character. I don't want to put that on somebody who's actually telling their full story, or not necessarily their full story, I just mean telling their own story, versus crafting one. It's a very different kind of a thing. I want to be careful with what I say, because I very much highly recommend this book. And so that's really why I decided to do this video, because I think that, I generally try to put reviews in as many kind of places as possible, in as many different formats, because as an indie author, I know how important reviews are, and really just one review can make the difference between whether a book gets seen or not. So, as a result, I think, since these YouTube videos are pretty in-depth, even though, a lot of the times I kind of ramble, and I also tend to put my own, I tend to talk about how I relate to them, because I really want to encourage thinking critically about books, not only in their inherent meaning and what the author might have meant by them, but also in relation to the reader's life, of being a reader who actively engages with books and allows books to let me think, and so I want to encourage that in other people as well. And again, I want to do this very respectfully, especially because this is a memoir specifically about a person who has experienced a syndrome that made their life growing up a very different reality than other kids around her. And as a result, I want to be very respectful when I am sharing this narrative. Really, I just kind of want to do the same thing I usually do of, instead of talking about the premise, I'll talk about okay, what is this memoir essentially about? What does it cover? Without going into the details, because obviously that's where you go and read it. And I think instead of talking about characters, well, maybe I'll just see how that kind of takes me, because I'm in no place to judge actual people. I will judge characters, but I'm not gonna judge actual people, and actual experiences. At least not. I think you'll understand what I mean when I talk about this story. See, there I go. I said story. I'm so used to doing discussing fictional narratives that it was a different journey reading this book. And it kind of actually came a little bit of a surprise, because I put this book on hold, I think, a few weeks ago, and I kind of expected about a 6-week wait, but it got ready, I think, about 2 weeks in, so I was already reading another library book at the time, and I went, I gotta finish this quickly. So I finished the other book, and then I read this one in a few days, and it didn't feel rushed. I wanted to make sure to read it in time for me to turn it back in, and I did. But I was like very much in a reading fiction mindset, and then I went, oh, memoir. And yeah. So I really hope I don't slip up, but just as a heads up, again, I'm kind of new to talking about and even really engaging a lot with nonfiction, because I tend to be more of I'm a fictional writer, and I've considered writing a memoir on multiple occasions, about my experiences with dissociative identity disorder, which is, I won't go into that in this video probably. Maybe I will, but the point is, with that, it's a disability that affected me quite a bit growing up, and still affects me now. It's not gonna go away, and I don't really want it to at this point. But it comes with a journey, and it's just a lot is different growing up with something that makes you so very, very different. And it is so different that it is involved in pretty much everything in your life in like some manner or another. That's my experience with DID, and I don't mind it. It's not even really all that much of a problem until other people make it a problem, when other people judge you for it. And I'm not saying there are no problems with DID, I'm saying in my experience as I am right now, which is I'm at a very healthy place with my system. We're very communicative, and we share memories with each other, so I'm not saying as a whole DID doesn't come without problems. I'm just saying, in my experience, where I am right now is quite a healthy place. But growing up, I had that experience of being very different, very other, and what I'm saying, though, about my experience growing up with DID being very different, it's the thing with that is that you're not judged for having a hidden disability unless other people know that you have that disability, or unless your symptoms show, and then they judge you for that. So for me, nobody actually knew that I had DID until I told them, and I learned what DID was back in high school, I think, and I went, yeah, that pretty much matches up with my experience. I read a lot about what other people experiencing it, what they went through, and what their symptoms are, and I was like, oh yeah, this explains so much about me. And I keep learning new things every day. I love it. Or I love that aspect of it. Again, I'm in a healthy place right now, so it's more fun than burdensome. But yeah, it's growing up with it, though. I felt very different, and I knew there was something that was different about me, to where I felt like if I told other people, if I told other people and I didn't know what was going on with me, I felt like they would think it was too different and too unmanageable and too weird. And even some people do think it's too all of that, even when I tell them, and I do know what's going on with me and all that. So, yeah, but it's very different growing up. Growing up and being able to know that you're different, but being able to hide it. We felt like we could hide it, so we did. And, even people we were close to didn't know. And, yeah, and so we pretty much grew up just having that idea of knowing stuff about ourselves and seeing stuff in like media. Now it was mostly harmful, inaccurate media. I mean, stuff like watching Norman Bates from Psycho, or knowing about I don't know the character's name from Split, but I refuse to watch that movie because I will not pay or support that movie in any way based on what I've seen of it and what I've heard of it, and also what it's personally done to me. Like, I've had an instance where somebody stopped being my friend because of that dang movie, because they thought I was like that. So it just, yeah. People say that harmful depictions of things don't actually harm things, or harm the people that it's describing, but it really does. And when you have a condition that is pretty rare, and it's villainized, people aren't going to stand up for you, and you're in danger of standing up for yourself. So it's just, it's really unfortunate that that's the case, and that's how I grew up. Thing is, though, that's very different. I say all this as a preface to kind of say that this is where I'm coming from walking into this book. Growing up, knowing that I'm very much an other, or I would be an other in other people's eyes. But they didn't know that unless I were to tell them or indicate to them that I had DID, or that I had things about me that were different, that my mind worked differently and all that. But with Ariel Henley, the author of this memoir, which is titled A Face for Picasso, Ariel grew up with Crouzon Syndrome, which, hold on, let me make sure I'm getting this correct, I don't want to spread misinformation. Going off of the blurb for this book, it says Crouzon Syndrome is a rare condition where the bones in the head fuse, my bad, my eyesight from here, a rare condition where the bones in the head fuse prematurely. And Ariel, along with her twin sister Zan, the two of them were the first twins known to have survived it. So Ariel grew up with Crouzon Syndrome, affecting so much of her life, but it's not just affecting her medically and physically, but also socially, because other people can tell that it affects the way that she looks. And so me walking into this book, I very much wanted, in general, I'm looking always for more authors who have different perspectives than me and who have grown up experiencing different things. And so it's like I'm always on the lookout for more reads. I'm sorry, that sounds very what's the word? More lighthearted than I mean. I'm always looking for reading perspectives by a lot of different types of authors. And I think I'm going to check real quick just to make sure, because I think the beginning of the book had a bit of a disclaimer about like the terminology used in it being based in what the terminology was at the time. I want to see though and make sure, because like with dissociative identity disorder, there's some mild discourse I've heard about what to call that. Like, do you call it a disability? Do you call it neurodivergence? And generally the neurodivergent community is pretty accepting of opening up to DID people. They're like, oh yeah, your brain works differently. That's essentially us. So yeah, come on in. The difference though between like DID and say something like autism or ADHD is that with autism or ADHD, like a lot of the neurodivergence stuff, those you are born with. Like you're born with your mind working that way. And with dissociative identity disorder, you become that. So you're not born with it, but at about a pretty young age, it's debated exactly when, but like the 8 years old, maybe, say around there, somewhere about then or maybe earlier, that's about when DID forms, you know. And it's also debated on whether it's a matter of personalities dividing or if it's kids have a lot of identities and then become one mostly, usually. I don't know. What I mean to say there though is technically it's not listed under that list of the government things where it says like, yeah, schizophrenia counts as a disability under the, what is it, Accommodations Act. I sound so uninformed right now, but I really just have assumed that there are no accommodations for people with DID because I can't think of anything that would help except for people understanding that I'm just gonna sometimes not remember things. Like if I forget your name, it's not because I don't care. It's just straight up, I don't recognize your face. So, yeah, anyway, so I haven't actually looked up if DID has any accommodations. Technically though, I think it is listed under that group, next to schizophrenia if I remember right, and a lot of people get the two confused, because they assume voices in your head means schizophrenia. That's literally the exact thing that people have told me, like voices in your head, schizophrenia. And it's like, well, okay, there's some nuance. Yeah, and I'm sorry I'm talking so much about DID when this video is really going to go into the memoir, and that talks about Crouzon Syndrome. What I'm saying here is I want to make sure I'm getting my terminology here right, because I don't recall if in the book Crouzon Syndrome, if that was described as a disability or if it was described as like a condition or what's the word for facial? I'm blanking, I'm sorry. So let me look that up. Let's start with the most general. So is Crouzon Syndrome a disability? I'm seeing words like genetic condition. I'm seeing disorder. I don't mind the word disorder because dissociative identity disorder, it's part of the name, but I think some people don't like the word disorder, so I think I'm going to go with condition based on what I see here. And I don't see it listed as a disability specifically on here, and I'm sure I don't mean to indicate that it's not. I just straight up, I don't know how to define a disability, like what qualifies, what doesn't, that kind of a thing. And I mean, honestly, I don't think I know enough about Crouzon Syndrome to really, like, I'm confused on whether DID is a disability, and I know so much about that, so I'm not sure I could even, like, if somebody asked me, is this a disability? I'm not sure on a lot of things, so I think sticking with the safest term, I'll go with condition, although it very may well be a disability. And regardless, Ariel experienced prejudice and discrimination and just generally, people being weird and being rude because of the way that she looked as a result of having Crouzon syndrome, because the way that I guess I'll start talking about what Ariel really goes into. This memoir talks about largely the growing up part of Ariel's life. So the events from when she was born to whenever she, I think, got into college, about that time frame. And that's really where the bulk of the writing takes place, or where it's what is being described. And so it starts with Ariel and Zan being born. Ariel is the author, remember, and Zan is her twin sister. So Ariel put together, basically, just in order to recount all this, if I remember right from like the afterword or acknowledgments, or even maybe before all of it, she basically described how she went through a ton of records, a ton of medical records, and talked with a lot of people she was close to, and doctors, and also, using her own memory to piece together everything in relation to her growing up with Crouzon syndrome as much as possible. And I think she expressed in the opening how I don't have the quote with me, so actually I probably shouldn't. Don't take my complete word on this. Read it yourself. I highly recommend. But the idea I think that she expressed is that there were like happy moments of her childhood, and as much as she wanted to like write a book about those moments, it would be leaving out or omitting a lot of the darker part of her reality, because growing up with Crouzon syndrome means like the bones being fused, I think it said, prematurely in your head. So in order to, like, as a child grows up, I mean, they get bigger, right? And that includes their head. So if the bones in most babies' heads tend to be kind of fluid, might not be the right word, but they don't stay in place, so they're able to grow as like the kid grows. But with Crouzon syndrome and the bones fusing together, it essentially means as the baby's internal organs grow, so like say the brain is growing, the skull is not. So the brain is gonna eventually press up against the skull if you don't do something about it. As a result, the treatment for this, and what Ariel went through, Ariel and Zan, her twin sister, is that they had to undergo a series of surgeries as they grew up in order to, while they kept growing, to keep their skull growing with them. And really, it was a matter of breaking the bones, or doing a surgery where a doctor would go in and break the bones of the skull, of their skulls, and if I remember right, take like bone matter from another essentially just like get their skull to expand via the surgery process. Yeah. And so that, and you can't just do that only once, because as they keep growing older, they need it multiple times, and that results in a lot of scar tissue as well, which means the face is really delicate. And especially as you're growing up, and parts of your face are, you're still growing, you're not really as solidified of like how you appear as like you will be in after adolescence, right? So it's when the doctors would like move around the bones and stuff of Ariel and Zan's skulls, it would result in their faces not being symmetrical. And so that, like, I don't know how much you tend to notice, or if you've heard of like the the golden ratio. I think Ariel talks about it in the book, but it's where it's essentially saying that human beings desire symmetry when they look at another human being. They're like, oh, if this human being, as the more symmetrical that this human being looks, the more beautiful they are. And so that implicitly means the opposite is true to most people. Of if you are not symmetrical, or the further from symmetrical you are, the less beautiful you seem. And so that played a role in Ariel's psyche growing up, as well as a lot of Picasso's work. And I mentioned the title is A Face for Picasso, and Ariel, being in art classes growing up, learned about different types of art and came across Picasso. And if you'll, I don't know, I'll assume you don't necessarily know Picasso. I won't go into too much detail. You can actually read a decent amount on him in this memoir, because Ariel felt kind of this, not exactly a bond. I don't know if she would call it a bond. So it's like, growing up, she felt there was, she kind of had internal discourse on Picasso, his work, his life, and how that all wraps together, and how that affects her perception of herself and how she looks, as well as how other people perceive her. And I found that really interesting, because I think, like I said earlier, hopefully that part didn't get cut out by the mic messing up, but I mentioned earlier that me growing up, I resonated quite a bit with villains in stories, because certain villains would express, basically have DID, except it usually wasn't said or mentioned. In other cases it was, but seeing the villain characters on screen made me feel very weird, because these villain characters with DID, or with very DID coded symptoms, it made me feel it made me feel seen to a certain extent, but it also made me feel like, oh wow, is this really all I can be to society? Am I only ever going to be perceived as a villain if anybody knows that I have DID? And so that had an effect on my psyche, and it resulted in a lot of internal discourse that changed over over time as I was exposed to more elements of different types of characters with DID in media. And so Ariel's like internal discourse and how that changed over time in relation to Picasso and his work was, I could resonate with that kind of thing. And especially whenever she started to consider the relationship between Picasso and his possible representation of himself as a monster in his paintings, specifically the Minotaur, and the relationship between monster and her, and yeah, I've felt that yeah, the word monster though comes up a lot for me. It resonates a lot with me because of how DID is depicted in modern media and how I grew up with that, and I was just going, am I a monster because of this? And so following along as Ariel recounts all of this felt quite visceral, for multiple reasons. I mean, not just that one, because talking about like the doctor's visits in particular were very there was a decent amount of detail in describing what exactly happens during these surgeries and what she remembered, and yeah, just it's just, that's really intense for anybody to go through, especially a kid though. And for that to be how you grew up, and I mean, that would affect a kid's psyche quite a bit, and so I was rooting for Ariel the entire time of like reading this and going, that all of this, it makes sense how she felt and how she grew, and I mean like emotionally as well as like physically, but like and the relationships that she had were really poignant, especially between her and her sister Zan. She reflects quite a bit on how seeing the surgeries, the exact same surgeries, happen to her sister, and experiencing them herself, and like how the order of the surgeries made a difference in how she thought of them, and just there's a lot of really a lot of thoughts I wouldn't have considered without having Ariel like directly state it, and so that kind of thing is why it's really important to read about just generally perspectives that you aren't familiar with, or that you don't personally associate with, I guess, if that makes sense. Because while I can relate to certain aspects of the otheredness, and I think a lot of people can generally relate to being othered, it's a very, very, very different experience when you are being othered and you know it, but you are not actively, you're blending in, you're able to hide to a certain extent, you know? And it's very, very, quite a bit different experience when you are being othered and people actively, like, they immediately, they see you and they just immediately start treating you differently than other people. And that experience I don't know about. Like, I can't speak to that. So that's why I think it's very important for people to read about that and to listen to people who have experienced experienced that. Because really just there needs to be a lot more empathy in just humanity. There needs to be a lot more empathy. Because yeah, it would have made a big difference in just some of those moments that Ariel describes where there's like a social scene that happens. I'm not gonna go too deep into what Ariel talks about, but like, how do I just generally say, like, there are a lot of cases where socially people just kind of didn't stand up for Ariel, and their silence spoke volumes about what they thought about her. Their silence was essentially like agreement. So all those adults who wouldn't step in to stop these kids from like making fun of Ariel like that, if just somebody had stepped in and stepped up and just showed basic human empathy or compassion, and I think it would help a lot too if media in general wasn't so, I think, Ariel talks about this too, of like, media tends to evoke the idea of anybody who looks asymmetrical, or like they have like a scar on their face, like a scar even from The Lion King, you know, is a villain. And the way you tell that as a child apparently is, oh look, that lion has a scar on them, so they are bad. You know, it's like stuff like that gets perpetuated in media, where that association of your face looking different than someone else's face, or than what people perceive as the norm, that gets marked in people's heads as like, oh, that's bad, because that's just what popular culture tries to perpetuate via that, what is it, a trope or a stereotype? It's not even, it's just inaccurate. I mean, that's what it is. But it still gets put in like movies, especially like visual mediums, but I think in books too, from what I've heard. So it's, yeah, you really just, people get so stuck in believing that, believing what they are, believing what they're fed. And I mean, that can be a very conscious thing, and it can also be very subconscious. In general, I think it is subconscious, and people don't really realize just how much implicit bias they have. And I know I have implicit bias too, and I'm trying to work on it, to do what I can to listen, because there are so many experiences out there that I don't experience, and I really want to understand how to genuinely help create a better world. And I think you can't really do that unless you listen primarily, and like, yeah, creating is great, but I think there really does have to be a lot of listening involved, or reading. I mean, you know what I mean, taking in information and processing it and going, oh, so this might be why I have some of my implicit bias about this, and here's how I can just kind of work through it. And really, it has to be on the individual level where you process that and work through that, because it should not be on other people to teach you how to do that. It shouldn't be on other people to have to guide you or hold your hand to do that. And I mean, I keep hearing that a lot too. I think it's mainly that idea of people who are marginalized, especially right now in the United States, from what I can tell, are sick and tired of being asked to do more work, when they have been putting in much effort to do work the entire time and no changes happened for them for the better. Like, talking especially about from what I hear of, like, Black people in the United States. But I think my overall point there is that when reading this book, I think I needed to read certain things being stated in order to really understand what Ariel went through. And so I highly recommend this book for for generally anybody, I think. I'm not sure there's a reason for me to pick out a certain audience in particular. Just because I think, I think Ariel's growth and Ariel's journey and all the hard stuff that she went through, and all of the mixed together with the like heartwarming parts of her growing up, and the bond she had with her sister in particular, but also her other family members and her friends, and her journey through elementary school, middle school, high school, college, how the surgeries kind of defined different parts of her life, and the difference that, like, each surgery made, because after each surgery she would look different. And she also looked less and less like her twin Zan. So just like, there's so many factors that Ariel touched on, or really delved into, that form this really cohesive memoir about her growing up. And it's really well written. It's very clear. I understood all of the where events were placed in time, because sometimes there was jumping to or referencing different parts of Ariel's life, but overall it moved kind of in one sort of linear fashion. And so I felt like I was really able to follow really well. And it really struck me to where I really wanted to make a video about it, this video, to talk about just how much it made me think and made me feel. And that's really the main goal of any of these videos that I make, in addition to being like a whispery, rambly thing for you to listen to, kind of without paying too much attention. If you don't pay a lot of attention, that's perfectly fine, that's great. But also, if you are paying attention, then I hope that these videos kind of, that they inspire you to think through how books make you feel, and that goes for both fiction and nonfiction, because I generally do cover fiction as my main kind of what I mainly talk about, but I think I do want to expand into nonfiction. Because I just want to know more about people. I think that's one of my deepest fascinations in the universe. In the universe sounds so dramatic, but I mean it. I very much care about writing, and I care about expressing characters and relaying aspects of the human experience, and a lot of that is drawing on my own experience, but I'm not self-inserting. I am creating and crafting characters based off of experiences that I know of and that I've heard of quite a bit. And part of why I do that is because I really want to be in tune with other people, because people fascinate me, and I really want to be optimistic about people too, because generally my internal compass goes towards, internal compass is not really the right term, I tend to be rather, not pessimistic, but I view it as realistic, in that I know that people behave in certain ways, and there are a lot of people out there who behave horribly toward other people. And so it just makes me really want to seek out the ones with empathy, the people with empathy. I really want to seek those people out and learn from them. So, and sometimes, the people with the most empathy are the ones who experience the most cruelty from other people or unkindness from other people. And I don't want to say that, the book is largely about Ariel's experiences with, or in relation to, having Crouzon Syndrome. But I also don't want to limit what the book talks about, or I don't want to say that Ariel's whole identity is having Crouzon Syndrome. Just to be clear, when you read the book, you tell more about who she is and how she is, and like how protective she is of her sister, and also like she'll go first in the surgeries. She steps forward to essentially go through the process first and make sure it works, so that her sister will be able to make it through on the second iteration of the surgery, or when the surgery happens with her. So like moments like that are very, very telling to Ariel's character. I mean character in an actual sense of a person's identity. So to be clear, you learn about Ariel and who she is quite a bit from reading her experiences, so I'm not talking about that as much, just because I think really I think it's best in her words to learn about who she is and her experiences. I'm really just kind of giving you some certain points about the things that stuck out to me the most, that I feel like would be compelling points for someone to hear about if they're considering reading this book. So yeah, I highly recommend it, just to say that. And actually, I forgot to mention the full title is A Face for Picasso, Coming of Age with Crouzon Syndrome. So that's actually the full title. I think I narrowed it down to A Face for Picasso the first time I said the title. And again, it's by Ariel Henley. So I'm glad I found this. I'm trying to remember where I actually found. Where did I find this? I know it was one of 3 books, and I think it was from a Disability Reads page, if I remember right. So about disabled authors and their perspectives. So I think that's where I found it from. And yeah, I'm still waiting. There's a book on hold that I'm waiting for, so we'll see. We'll see when that comes in. Yeah, let's see about my notes. Just making sure. Is there anything else I was gonna say? I think, yeah, I'll just go ahead and say finish with like the last bit I put in my Instagram review of this book. And it's just to say, overall, this book both healed parts of me and made me question other parts, molding me into a better person. I highly recommend this read. So, yeah, I hope that covers kind of this book well enough, because, yeah, this really is my first time doing a lot of, like, talking about a nonfiction book, specifically a memoir. Because, yeah, usually I talk about fiction, and also even these videos are still pretty new to me. So the format of me talking about, like, the overall what a book is about is still very new to me. And, yeah, so it's still kind of subject to change. I might find that as I read more nonfiction books, I might decide I'll actually do the nonfiction book videos in a different sort of format, or do sort of different layout with it. Or maybe I don't know. I think I do definitely want to do videos on the nonfiction books that I liked, and I feel like I can, like, discuss. There's some nonfiction books that I feel like I would have a really hard time talking about, but it could just be because it's new, me talking this much about stuff, specifically about nonfiction books. We'll see, though. If you have any feedback on this video, like what specifically I talked about, or like what you wanted to hear maybe more about to get a better gauge on the style or the subject matter of this book, let me know. I'm very much open to adjusting how these videos are, because, yeah, right now I don't really have a lot of feedback because nobody's really watching right now, and that's fine. I can still just shout these videos into the void. But I do hope it reaches somebody, because I do quite like the books that I'm talking about on this channel. I won't make a video unless I actually enjoyed the book that I read, or learned something, got something out of the book that I read. So I hope that I'm able to, like, help support these books by sharing, because from what I hear, that's generally how books get their, especially indie books or lesser known books, that's how they get readers, is via sharing reviews and people talking about and gushing about how much they love a certain book. And I think even on smaller accounts, that's a good thing, you know, to really, of course it's a good thing even on smaller accounts. What I meant to say is, it's useful to the book even to have, like, smaller accounts promoting it. And so I'm hoping that as a small account, I can also help books like this one reach more people, you know. So who knows? I don't know if it'll help, but I'm trying to do my part to share some awesome books. And yeah, I'm trying to think if there's anything else. If you've seen a few of my videos, you know me. I try to wrap something up and then I just keep talking. So, but yeah, I think I'm just about done. So thank you for listening. You are a wonderful listener. I mean, you're still around, you're still here, so that's awesome. And it's okay also if you've, fallen asleep or you're not paying attention or whatever, that's perfectly fine. I'm just kind of here. Don't worry about it. Yeah, so I guess I'll just say thank you again, and yeah, good luck